Well, that's fun. Hi, gang. My name is Dave. I'm definitely an alcoholic and an addict, and it's great to be here today. First of all, let me say thank you to my dear friend Lily, who I got to know about 5 years ago on a Zoom meeting that I started attending. I had contracted COVID quite badly about 2020, and it almost killed me. Um, I really didn't leave the house for a bit, and it took me a couple of months to get to that point where I could leave the house, and I was awful sick. It was bad, and a friend of mine who was there when I first walked in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1988 um, told me about Zoom. And he gave me a long list of all these meetings. And I said, well, I've got a computer and I've got the time. So, I was always a recovering person that went to meetings, but I got involved with Zoom. And now I start out my day every day, just about probably 9 times out of 10, I guess I should say, going to a 7 a.m. Zoom meeting that's based out of Rhode Island. And I see that some of the people that attend that meeting have come to this meeting today. I'll point them out. Jack, how we doing, Jack? I'll try to keep you awake. Same goes for my friend Mark, who Mark and I are good friends from Florida and Zoom, and of course Cheryl and Lily. I've gotten to know them over the past 5 years or so, and it's just been a pleasure knowing them, and watching them get and stay sober. Um, my story starts out like this. I'm originally from Bristol, Connecticut. Um, was brought up there. I'm Irish Italian. I was born in 1952. Um, I, I was the type of person that, as I grew up, I could see that alcohol and drugs were causing people problems, people that I had seen. And I didn't like the way they appeared. I didn't like the way that people talked when they were drunk and high and everything like this. So I wanted nothing to do with drugs and alcohol, but that was going to change. I got to be about 17 years old or so, and I started dating this girl. She was a little older than me. She was a hairdresser. She worked for my mother, actually. And I would go over to see her, and her dad would make us highballs, whiskey and ginger ale. A highball is kind of a sweet drink, and I always like sweets, so I learned to enjoy that, and I kind of enjoyed the warm fuzzies that I would get when I would imbibe in this drink, and um, things were going okay for a while. I would just have one drink, and drugs had not yet come into my life, but they were coming, believe me. So anyway, she and I really kicked it off well. We were crazy about each other, you might say, or maybe I was just crazy. And we started, collecting furniture and planning a life ahead and this and that. And we had been going out for a couple of years probably. And I I developed a problem in my lower stomach where I had to be opened up for quite a serious operation. It's called a hydrocele. And when I was cut open at the hospital at that time, there was a lot of pain involved. I was given morphine in the hospital, and I guess I kind of liked that. But when I was leaving the hospital, I was given something called Darvon, which was in the late 60s a very popular drug for pain. And I actually remember where I was and what I was doing when I crossed the line from a into an active alcoholic and addict. I was working on a hot rod at my mother's house in her driveway, and I remember thinking to myself, "Hmm, I liked the way that made me feel. And, I chased that feeling for 20 years. Um, One of the first things that I lost was that girl that I was engaged to. When I would mix the pills and marijuana eventually came in with the alcohol, I absolutely went out of my mind. I was like Jekyll and Hyde. I went from a guy that was relatively calm and somewhat reasonable to a liar, a cheat, and a thief. That I would do anything. And believe me, I did to get what I wanted, to get that feeling that I was chasing. Um, as I said, the first thing that I remember losing was that relationship. Um, Matter of fact, I didn't want to lose that relationship. I remember going over to that girl's house and knocking on the door, and her dad answered the door. He looked me right in the eye, and here's the guy that introduced me to daily drinking, looking me in the eye and says, "Dave, you're not welcome here. Stay away from my daughter." And I was kind of devastated, to be honest with you. I was hurt, and I really didn't know what to do with my feelings at the time. I had no program. I didn't have religion, or I was a high school dropout, as a matter of fact, who got a GED. But I knew that if I got more alcohol and more drugs, I would feel better. And I kept chasing it. Believe me, I chased it and chased it and chased it. I Over the years, my young years in my 20s, I made a lot of moves to a lot of states. But wherever I found myself, there I was, and there was my disease, looking to get me in trouble. Um, I I met a girl one time at a bar. What a shock, right? And her name was Diane, and we started dating. She was a little bit younger than me by about 3 years or so, maybe four. And before I knew it, she was pregnant. And we were going to get married, but again, alcohol and drugs and my insane brain. About a week before the wedding, I canceled it. We had gotten into a fight, and um, I was just being totally unreasonable, which that's what alcohol does to me and drugs. We didn't get married. So my son was born, and I was bouncing around from job to job to job at this point in my life. And I had moved to Maine and looked to settle down up there. It didn't work out. Um, One thing about being an alcoholic and an addict is there was very, very little stability in my employment and where I lived for that next probably 20 years. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, I got into dealing drugs when I was in my mid 20s, and I wasn't very good at it because I got caught almost immediately, and it was a felony, and it was another kind of bottom in my life. I lost a good job that I had. I was an inspector in a valve plant. Lost another relationship. Lost, all the money that I had was gone, and trying to keep out of jail and being out on bail and such. And I found myself being unemployable. Um, I wasn't able to pay the rent either. So I found myself at this point living in poverty. I was on welfare. So every week I would get about, I think, $13 or $14 for food. And I would have to live on $13, $14, for a week. And eventually my lights were turned off and my gas was turned off in my little apartment. And of course, every other day or so, my Polish landlady, Mrs. Michnikowski, she would come upstairs to my apartment. All she wanted out of me was her rent money, and I didn't have any money. She would knock on the door. She'd say, "David, you go get job, pay rent." I can still hear her saying that 50 years ago. She was quite a lady, Mrs. Michnikowski. And you're going to hear about her more at the end of my story, but um, it got to be wintertime back in the mid 70s, and it was getting cold outside. And I was pretty resourceful guy. So I thought to myself, well, they took the meter out for the gas and they took the meter out for the electricity, which was in the basement where I was living. I went downstairs and I saw where the wires were, where the meter used to be. And I found some old wire and this and that, and I fabricated a way to jump where the meter used to be. So I would have electricity. Now, most people at this point would have walked upstairs to their flat and just turned a light switch on to see if the electricity was working. I found an old iron coat hanger on the floor there, and I put it across these wires, and it was like shock therapy. I don't know if any of you people have ever seen stars in front of your eyes, but that's what I saw. I really got quite a jolt. But I survived the shock, and I went upstairs and I was all proud of myself because now I was ripping off the power company. Every day I would scrape together a couple of dollars and go up to the Polish deli up on the corner from where I lived. And I would buy a half gallon of the cheapest beer you ever had in your life. It's called Canadian Ace. And I guess, it was about 79 cents a bottle, and I'd get a couple of hot dogs and I'd go home. Well, by this time I had sold all my appliances. I didn't need them anymore. Up to that point, I didn't have electricity. But all I had left was an electric coffee pot. So in the morning, I would make myself a half a pot of coffee and then pour that out at noontime and fill up my electric coffee pot with water. And I'd put a couple of hot dogs in and I would boil that. And so my coffee pot became my stove. And, this is the way I lived for the good part of a winter, just somehow getting by and somehow every day getting a couple of bucks to buy a pack of cigarettes and a couple of hot dogs and a half a gallon of beer. One day, a buddy of mine showed up, and we had been friends for quite a while, probably 10 years. And he said, how would you like to move to upstate New York and help me build a log cabin? And I had absolutely nothing going on in my life, at that point. And I said, yeah, sure. So we loaded up what few belongings I had in his car, and me and him and his wife headed to upstate New York to build a log cabin. It was quite an adventure. Now, most people would have been pretty excited, to drive through upstate New York. It's quite lovely. There's a lot of mountains and trees and lakes and streams and birds and deer and all kinds of stuff. I found out you could buy beer on Sunday at a bar to go. I mean, to me, that was the most exciting thing I think I had ever heard in my life because I couldn't do it in my home state of Connecticut. But I moved to upstate New York with my friend and his wife, and that summer we built a log cabin. We went into the woods and we dragged out cedar trees, and I got to be in pretty good shape that summer. I drank a lot of beer. Um, and anytime I would go to somebody's house, um, one of the first things I would do would be to visit their medicine cabinet and rate it for tranquilizers or muscle relaxants or pain pills. I loved them all. I didn't care. You know what my favorite feeling was? Numb. Numb was my favorite feeling in the world. And believe me, I chased that thing till it almost killed me. Um, I settled down and I got a job as a furniture salesman somehow in a department store, and I was doing all right. I was living in a hotel, a cheap hotel at that, and drinking every day. This hotel also had a bar. What a shock, right? So I'm getting along somewhat okay. The law wasn't on my back at this time, and I thought, well, maybe it's time to settle down. So I found a girl that was walking down a country road. Her name was Kathy. Came from a big family. And about a year or so later, she was very Catholic. And we got married in a church in Messina, New York, up by the Canadian border. Well, 3 weeks later, I decided that I would go into Messina one night to this discotheque. This was 1978. I would go to this discotheque 3 weeks after I got married just to get a couple of beers, and see what's going on. And I turned around and I looked, and there she was, wife number two. Her name is Claudia, and I left my first wife after 3 weeks. And I am not proud of that fact, and I contemplated for many years what to do about that, and I talked to trusted people in the rooms, and what I was told is your best bet is just to leave her ass alone. There's nothing that you can do to make a situation better with your first wife. Anyway, I met Claudia that night, and we've been together just about ever since. We got married in 1979, and she was there. I went drinking on drinking and drugging for the next 8 or 9 years. Um, Claudia was a teacher, and we went to a family wedding in Connecticut in 1988 in the fall, and actually, yeah, whatever it was. And I got drunk, drunk, drunk. Now, for the 4 years prior to that, I had been getting DWIs, which is driving while intoxicated. I had been getting caught driving. I would either have car crashes or a cop would see me swerving. One time, one of these DWIs, I had a Volkswagen camper van, which is about 50 horsepower. And I remember I was drunk as a skunk driving this thing. And I remember looking in my rear view mirror, and I thought to myself, there is a cop back there and he's going to be coming. So I put that Volkswagen in third gear and I went up the steepest hill in Dutchess County, New York, trying to outrun a cop with a 50 horsepower Volkswagen camper van. And I got to the top of that hill, and don't you know, the cop pulled in right behind me. And he comes over to my window and he says, I think I smell something in your vehicle. And I said, well, I had a couple. He says, I want you to step out of your car. And I says, all right. So I step out of this Volkswagen camper van. I'm pretty drunk, and high. He says, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a sobriety test. And if you can pass it, I'm going to let you go. I says, oh, okay. Well, what do I got to do? He says, I want you to stand there with your eyes closed, your feet spread your arms, and I want you to touch the tip of your nose with your index finger. So I closed my eyes, my feet spread, brought my arms to my nose. You know what I heard next? Click. I was so drunk. He had put handcuffs on me right in front of me. And I opened my eyes and I looked at him. I said, man, that was pretty cool. And so off we went to jail, and I was handcuffed to a wall, which I don't know if any of you folks have been handcuffed before, but it's not a very nice feeling. It's downright no fun. It's one of the least fun things I've ever had to do in my life. But it wasn't the last time. I was going to be caught 2 more times in the next 3 years driving drunk. I started selling cars about that time for a big dealership, and they would give me cars to drive, demonstrator cars, and I would blow them up or crash them, and a buddy of mine was running this dealership, so I he kept on letting me work. I was lucky. I guess I was always kind of lucky, in my career, in my drinking and drugging career. Um, it was getting worse. It was getting worse and worse. The hangovers were getting more unbearable. My wife and I were fighting. As a matter of fact, we got into a fight one time at our our house down in Dutchess County. And I remember I broke some furniture and she called the cops. All she wanted to be was safe, you know. And my wife is not an alcoholic. And I scared her when I drank and drugged, you know. So she called the cops. And I remember I was sitting on my front stoop and the state trooper arrives at my house and he looks at me and he knew I was wasted, you know. He says, "Look, here's the deal. Stay away from her. If I have to come back again, I'm putting you in jail." And I understood he was being serious with me, and he gave me another break, just what I needed, you know. It was shortly after that we attended a friend's daughter's wedding in Connecticut, and I didn't know that, you know, it was going to be my bottom the day after that wedding, but during that wedding, I got extremely high and drunk, and um, we all ended back at my one of my brother's homes. And I did something that night that I didn't do very often, but I did it that night. I blacked out, and when I came to the next morning, all I knew was I had a 12 pack out in my car, and I had pills that I was taking from a doctor, all these stomach tranquilizers and muscle relaxants and stuff and this and that. And anyway, I went out to my company car to get this beer. And I remember sitting on the floor in my brother's kitchen and putting the beer away in the fridge, sitting on the floor and doing it. And I looked up and it was like a cloud over me. I looked to my right. Here's my wife and my mother. And to my left, my brothers. And I remember my mom started it out. And she said to me, "You know, Dave, when you drink, you are crazy." And she had my total attention that morning. You know, I said, "Yeah," and she says, "Do you know what you did last night?" And I said, "Ma, I have no idea what I did." She's there. "You were so drunk, you found your way into the living room, and you sat on a love seat. And your 10-year-old niece, she was 10 years old at the time, came over and sat next to me. I keeled over and passed out on top of her. They had to lift me up to get her out." And when I was told what I did that last night, I got full of fear. I got full of fear, but something else happened. I started listening to people. Um, I made an agreement that day that I would seek some help. And I ended up going to a psychiatric facility in Poughkeepsie, New York, talking to an alcoholism person. And they said, "You sound like a candidate for a rehab." And I said, "Yeah." Well, I had this third DWI hanging over my head at the time. It was a felony, its second one. And I said, "Yeah, uh, yeah, it's time to do something." And we had enough insurance to pay for a 28-day stay. And I went to this rehab and I listened to learn, and I learned to listen when I was there. Um, Couple of things I remember being told there were don't drink and go to meetings, which we hear it all the time in AA meetings. But as I was checking out that place, checking out to go home after 28 days, I had made friends with one of the counselors, and she told me two things. She said, "Dave, the first thing you got to do is try to remain calm." You know, I had been using drugs to keep me calm, you know, and basically what they were doing was helping me get through the hangovers that I had. So, I mean, it was just insanity upon insanity, you know. But she said, "Try to remain calm and watch out, because what you're not addicted to now, you're going to find yourself getting involved with in sobriety." And I don't know that I knew exactly what that meant, but 37 years later, I know exactly what that means, because there's all kinds of things that I've gotten into over the years that, you know, want to draw me back into my alcoholism and my drug addiction. And I have to use the steps to keep clean and sober. It's it's the way that works. It's the way that works for me. Today, I have two home groups. One of them is that 7 o'clock in the morning Zoom meeting. And the other one is a group that Mark R. and I belong to down in Florida. It's the Monday Night Men's Step Meeting that is down in, what's that, Lecanto, Beverly Hills. And that's it's a men's step meeting group, and it's just a strong, good place to go. I don't have to worry about looking at women or anything like that I like to do. And it's how I keep sober. I try to live the steps to the best of my ability. I have a sponsor. His name is Tom S. He's been my sponsor for a number of years now, and this thing works if I work it. It don't if I don't. So I'm just really glad to be here today. And once again, I'll finish up and say thank you to Lily and for all you people for being here today. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. That was just lovely. Now it's time for people to share back.